Welcome and thank you for joining us today. And this session is presented by Paul Krieger, who's a longtime friend of mine, and he's an occasional partner in writing and teaching projects. And he's a professor emeritus at Grand Rapids Community College. His talk today is titled, Think Small, How Authoring Standalone Supplements with Small Publishers Could Be Your Niche. So whenever you're ready, Paul.
Thanks very much, Kevin. I hope everyone has joined the TAA conference as much as I have been. It's really been a great one so far. And it's my pleasure to be with you today. So if you want to make a note of my email address at the bottom there, paulkriegerstudio@gmail.com. In the event that we didn't have time for everyone's questions, you can always email me a question later and I'd be happy to take care of that. So I'm going to advance my screen and you should be seeing the word outline. Everybody give me a thumbs up if they're seeing the outline.
Yep,
okay, good. So we don't have a trouble with that. So the first thing I'd like to do is just give you a few things about myself and my book series because it's rather unique and not like a typical textbook. And I'll say a few things about my publisher because not everybody works with a small publisher like I do. Second thing I would like to do is talk about the benefits of working with standalone supplements like the book series that I have. Third thing is to talk about the benefits of working with a small publisher. And the last fourth point for the outline is I'm going to give some marketing tips that I've used that I found successful. And these will apply to both small and large publishers alike. So that's what we want to cover in about the next 30 minutes. So a little bit of background on me. Kevin already mentioned that I'm a professor emeritus of anatomy and physiology, Grand Rapids Community College, Grand Rapids, Michigan. The first unique thing you should know that I wear two hats. So I'm both the author and the illustrator for my book series. All my artwork is done digitally, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. I've been a TAA member since 2002, so I've attended annual conferences, many at this point, presented at conferences, and also written for the academic author. I had good timing in joining TAA, and I have to give a thanks to now retired anatomy and physiology textbook author Mike Timmons, because he's the person who first introduced me to TAA, and I learned about a lot about the publishing process before I signed my first contract. And like you heard in the previous session, for those people who are prospective authors out there, the best advice I can give you is to hire an intellectual property attorney to negotiate your first contract, because looking back, I'm really glad that I did that. Okay, so I need to explain to you the idea for my book series because it was rather a little bit unique, a little out of the ordinary. So the title of my book series is called The Visual Analogy Guides. And I need to explain to you what I mean by a visual analogy. So if you look at this illustration, it says a thoracic vertebra from your vertebral column looks like a giraffe head. So I'm going to use the virtual laser pointer. So in the lab in anatomy physiology, if we were looking at the skeletal system, for example, here's a thoracic vertebra that I'm showing with the virtual laser pointer. And students have to learn all these different anatomical parts. They have to know the names and how to spell them. So if you look at this giraffe head, look at this structure right here. Doesn't that look like the snout of the giraffe head? And look at this structure here coming off. Doesn't that look like the ears of the giraffe head? And this right here being the horns of the giraffe head. So if you superimpose the giraffe head on the thoracic vertebra, you're taking the unknown and making it known to the student. So this is actually a form of learning that you're probably familiar with, called contextualized learning. It's very effective. And for non-majors like the ones I deal with, it lowers their anxiety and really helps them learn the material. So this was my idea for my book. I wanted a book that had visual analogies in it. And I used to sketch these out at the lab tables of students. So my whole book idea was born in the lab from my teaching. Okay, so now you know a little bit about the book concept. So here's what I decided I wanted it to do. My students were actually encouraging me to do this book. This is about almost 17 years ago now. And they said, Mr. Krieger, you should really write a book. And at first I kind of just brushed it off and didn't take it seriously. But like you've heard in previous sessions yesterday, you look at the market and you see if there's anything out there, and a real good feedback that you can get right away is if there's not much in the marketplace like that, you probably have a good book idea. So I did that, and I found there wasn't much out there like that, and I really wanted to pursue it. So when I became serious about it, I said, okay, probably the best way to refer to my book is a core concept book. I wanted this book not just to be filled with visual analogies, but to be an abbreviated textbook that would go over all the core content that students would need to know for the course, and kind of a stripped down, trimmed down activity book. So I wanted it to be a consumable. It was going to be a soft cover, 3-hole drilled and shrink wrap. That happens to be the way that my small publisher deals with and distributes all their hard copy titles. I wanted it in a modular format. That means that I was going to have the text on the left side page and illustrations on the right side page. I wanted a 2-color book, and I wanted activities. So I wanted it activity rich, fill in the blanks, coloring activities, mnemonics for learning, all these different things. Here's an example of a 2-page spread to give you an idea of what my book looks like. So at the top, we have the header. This is a module from the respiratory system, and it's entitled the tracheobronchial tree. So dealing with structures that penetrate into your lung. If you look over on the left side, you can see the text. A lot of it is organized in table for this particular module. Then you can see illustration on the right side. If you look at the bottom of the text page, you can see a key to the illustration. So I'm going to get out my laser pointer again. Notice we have labels for all of these structures over here. There's the answer key, so no need to look it up in the back of the book. Every module is a self-enclosed learning unit in a 2-page spread. Notice there's a coloring activity, and anytime there's a coloring activity, I have a coloring icon by it with coloring instructions, as you can see there. There's also fill in the blank. So this gives students the opportunity to write out the names of the structures and spell them correctly, as simulating what they would need to do on a typical lab test. Graphic layout and design is important. So if you look at this green arrow, it's showing you the structures are covered from macroscopic to microscopic in a diagonal orientation. For my book, I wanted a lot of white space. White space invites the student to write out terms, scribble down notes, and make it her own as you're working on this kind of thing. So that gives you an idea of what my book is like. Okay, what else does it have in it besides some of the things I showed you so far? So I wanted mnemonics, and in mnemonics, I wanted to visually show people the visual and the mnemonic next to each other. So I always want to incorporate text with visuals. Another thing I do, as we talked about before, is analogies. This is comparing a bone in the skull to a bat. And then we have lots of coloring activities where they color code different parts. And so those are a few of the different activities you find in the book. What other things might they see? Another helpful tool is having written summaries. This is showing you kind of a flow chart with arrows to show you a pathway, because in anatomy and physiology, there's a lot of pathways that students need to deal with. And then, as we saw previously, fill in the blank. So I already mentioned that before. Okay, so I have 4 books in the series. So just a quick, brief overview of those. My first book that I wrote about 17 years ago now is The Visual Analogy Guide to Human Anatomy. That's now in its 5th edition that just came out this past January. It's about 368 pages. My second book is A Visual Analogy Guide to Human Physiology. That's about 384 pages. My third book was a combined anatomy and physiology book. And that will soon be going into its 4th edition, currently in 3rd, and that's almost 600 pages. And then my 4th book is a visual analogy guide to chemistry, and that's a little over 300 pages. So here's the covers of the books in the series. Notice that they all kind of showcase an analogy on the cover, which is kind of an advertisement for one of the key learning tools that makes the books unique. Also notice that they have relatively low price points. As all the authors know out there, it's the publisher's job to set the price. We don't have any control over that. But I am really happy that they've decided to keep the cost low. As a matter of fact, during the pandemic, they made a decision. You'll see that this $37 price point for my anatomy and physiology books, those books used to be around about $45 or $46. They actually lowered the price because they were getting feedback from the market. There was price sensitivity for this type of book. And it turns out that this was a smart move because it's been a big hit this past spring in the market. So I have the lowest cost book is about $26. That's the chemistry book. The highest one, the new price point, will be around $52 for the anatomy and physiology book. This is the cover of the 5th edition of my anatomy book that just came out this past January. All the authors know out there how important a good book cover is and being a good advertisement for your book. So I have a little quick way for you to evaluate your own covers in the future. So I'm going to use graphic design principles. So if you use these, you can evaluate quickly how good of a cover you have on your own book or in future book covers. So use the acronym CRAP, and CRAP stands for C for contrast. You want a lot of contrast, and that focuses attention on more important items. R for repetition. It ties objects or images together and unifies things. A for alignment, organizes the page to make it easier on the eye. And last but not least, proximity. It creates relationships between objects. So to give you examples of how to apply these principles, I'm going to show you an old cover. That's the 2nd edition of my anatomy book. And the new cover that you just saw is on the right for the 5th edition. So I could spend a lot of time on this one slide, but for sake of time, I'm going to keep it short. So here's what I'll do. I'm just going to go through and run through the whole list. So CRAP, C-R-A-P. What was the first one again? Contrast. You can have contrast in many different things. One of the things that we can look at is contrast in color. Okay, so if I look at this old cover right over here, notice that my name is in black and they have the word 2nd edition in white. So that's contrasting colors, black and white. Notice the background color is kind of a purple, and then the middle color here is kind of a magenta, contrasting colors. What can we also look at contrast in? Size of the fonts. So notice that the word anatomy, it draws your attention because they've used a larger size font and smaller for the other words in the title. Let's do the same thing over here for the newer cover. So if I look over here, let's look at contrasting color. They have a blue background and they have a red font, human anatomy. So there's contrast. Is there also contrast in size like we saw in the other one? Yes. The words human anatomy in the title are much larger than a visual analogy guide 2. So we see that both covers were using contrast. What about repetition? Do they have a repeated element in this old cover over here? There isn't really one repeated element that serves to unify anything. If I look over here on the right, is there a repeated element? Yes. What is it? It's this oval blue that you see in the background. There's one here, there's one here, and there's one here. So that's an intentional graphic design element. What does it do? It unifies all these are analogies. The peace sign, the parachute, and the kangaroo pouch are all analogies. It's visually telling the person or the reader or the student, these 3 things go together. These 3 things are alike. So there is a repeated element there. So now we get to A for alignment. here, the text is aligned over here on the old cover. It also has a line right on, it's justified right on this side. What about alignment over here? Yeah, we have alignment of the words in the title, line left. We also have alignment between that Y in anatomy and the end of my name at the bottom. There's a drawn imaginary line there, and these are lined up. So that's good alignment. Where else is there alignment? The smaller text here is a line left. This is a line left. That's a line left. So we got alignment there. Okay, last but not least is proximity. Proximity is supposed to show you that things close together have a similar purpose. So they actually made a proximity mistake in this old edition. Here's what it was. My name, the author name, is next to second edition. Does the second edition have anything to do with me directly? No. That would more appropriately be like my title or something. Where should they have put that? They should have put it over here, because the proximity of second edition to the title makes a lot more sense. Isn't that what they did over here on this one? They took the title and they put 5th edition underneath it here, not underneath my name, which is a more appropriate relationship. Another example of proximity would be how all of these marker pens are together as opposed to scattered all over the screen. So all over the cover. So that gives you an example of graphic design principles to evaluate it. Now, I'm going to have everybody go to the chat real quick. I didn't sign up for a poll, but I'm going to have you real quickly just do one thing. Which cover is a better advertisement for what my book is about? Type in O for old and N for new, just one letter, O for old or N for new. And then I'm going to see what people came up with. Now, I don't have the chat open, Kevin. Can you take a quick look and see if there's a...
Oh, there's a whole bunch of N's. The only difference is whether they're uppercase or lowercase.
That's the only difference. Okay, so here's a really important thing to point out to you. The old cover was actually, my publisher paid a lot of money to have a professional cover designer design that cover. I wouldn't say it's bad, but I don't really like it. I actually designed the new cover, and it's not in my contract, but I negotiated this with my publisher, and it helped them lower costs, and I think it helped create a better design. That's an example of, if you have a good relationship with your publisher, you might be able to negotiate things like that to even, in this case, make a better cover. Okay. So let's go to the next slide. Now I'd like to do a little bit about my publisher. So I like to talk about Morton Publishing. And so I'm going to get off of the laser pen here. So this is real brief because I'm not trying to put in a plug for my publisher, but I think people aren't always aware that there are small publishers even out there. In addition to Morton Publishing, there's Kendall Hunt and several other small publishers. So there aren't many, but there are out there. So my publisher was founded in 1977 by Doug Morton, hence the name Morton Publishing. They're located out of Denver. They have 30 employees, only 18 staff and 12 sales reps. So it's a very small company. They focus in on lab manuals, photographic atlases, and dissection guides in the biological sciences. So biological sciences represents about, I would say 70% of their business. The remaining 30% is in areas like English composition, mathematics, and things such as that. Okay. They have best-selling titles in anatomy and physiology, microbiology, general biology, and pharmacy. And they do a lot of custom publishing, like lab manuals. So that's a little bit about my publisher. Okay, so quick question. What do you think the advantages of selling printed books in loose leaf form? So all of my publishers' books, all their titles are put out in this format, 3-hole drilled and shrink wrap. Now, I won't have you go to the chat for this one, but as you probably have guessed, there's almost no used book sales at all. because to have a used book sale with one of these shrink wrap things, you have to ensure every page is present. And when it's three-hole drilled, often there would be missing pages. So this really controls the used book market for my publisher. So it's actually a good strategy in that sense, because it's helps them with their business. Okay, so this is the only other time I'm going to have you go to the chat is this one. We have a multiple choice question. I'm just going to have you put the letter in. So guess what percentage of my books are ebooks? So A is 3%, B is 9%, C is 15%, D is 30%, and E is 45%. So put your guess in there, A through E. That's all you have to write. A through E, what you think it is. And I'll rely on Kevin to take a quick peek again and see what most people are guessing. So I'm sorry to burden you with this, Kevin.
Oh boy, yeah, this is there's A's, B's, C's, D's, and E's.
So it's all over the board?
Well, not all over the board. At the beginning, we had a lot of C's and D's. I'd say that's probably the heaviest. C maybe is edging out a little bit.
Okay, so C heavy. So most people are guessing around 15%. So I think you're going to be surprised. It's A, 3%. And so I think there are a lot of reasons for this. During the pandemic was the only time that I did see my ebooks rise substantially. It went up to about 5 or 6%, which is a substantial increase for me. That's over double my normal. So in other words, 97% of my books are in print form. And I think you can probably guess why. I think it's because the coloring activities and the activities in them lend themselves to the active learning and just writing on a regular piece of paper. At least that's what we hear from, I learned kind of anecdotally, just from feedback from students and learning it from sales reps. So that might be quite a surprise for most of you. Okay, so benefits of working with standalone supplements. So now we're on that second point. There's a lot. So I just have a bulleted list of some of the key ones here. The first thing is that unlike a textbook adoption, I can have recommended adoptions. So it's optional. So potentially this means I can end up with a lot more adoptions at a lot more colleges, because sometimes my book is recommended and other times it's required. If it's recommended, we tend to see about a 10% sell-through of the student population. So just getting it recommended, if you get a lot of recommendations at a lot of colleges, that can add to a lot of sales. Lower book costs, we already saw. I mentioned that my book prices are between $26 to $52, averaging in the $30 some range. So low book costs often end up with more sales. I mentioned that it's a consumable. I mentioned that my publisher does a 3-hole drilled and shrink wrap. So that really controls used book sales, which helps their bottom line. I think the fact that it's a unique product, there's a little more interest and a little less competition that I have to deal with than I would if I was authoring a major textbook. So there's another point. And it's activity-based, as I already pointed out. I think that makes it a little more fun and a little more popular. The coloring activities, I think, are really one of the key drivers of the more in-print sales. And that's why I made a conscious decision to put coloring activities on the cover for that 5th edition that we just looked at, book cover. I really think that's important. It's not called a coloring book, and compared to the coloring books that are out there for anatomy, it's substantially different. But I think that activity is a good one to show. I have a lot lighter workload compared to the typical textbook author. So I'm on a 4-year revision cycle typically. Sometimes that changes, my publisher changes it. It's not set in stone, but usually 4 years. I don't have ancillaries to deal with. I don't have test banks or course management, learning management systems to deal with. So it is a lighter load. For me, I'm the sole author and illustrator on all my titles, so I don't have to deal with potential co-author headaches. And some people have a wonderful team of co-authors, and for some other people, it doesn't work out so well, sadly. So I basically can do it myself. So what about benefits of working with my small publisher? So the first key thing is everything's simpler. Everything's simpler. How many of the textbook authors out there can say they've had 2 developmental editors in the last 16 years? I've had only 2, and I know them personally, and they're real big advocates for my book because they know me, they know my books, and you know how important that is to have an editor who's on your side. Less staff, less stress. They only have about 30 employees. There's also less red tape. There's just not as many hoops to jump through. Basically, I deal with my editor and that's it. I pretty much have just have one main person to deal with as I'm working on my new editions. There's a lot more attention when you're working with a small publisher for standalone supplements such as mine. And that's really refreshing. We're also, my publisher really is good because they're really focusing on niche markets, such as the biological sciences. They really know how to attack that market, and they know how to work it well, and they're effective in doing it. Lower staff turnover rate usually means the staff is happier, and you have a lot of consistency with staff, from the sales reps to a lot of the other staff. It's also a lot just easier to be well connected. So with a dozen sales reps, again, I know all of them, and we go back and forth with email, and that's really nice. Complete autonomy over my work. I shouldn't say complete, but pretty close to it. For example, when they send out reviewers and I get reviewer feedback, they give me complete control over whether I implement those comments or don't. And because I've been working with them 17 years, we built up a lot of trust over the years, and that's given me more autonomy to do more things like design the book cover that you just saw. So more loyal customers due to their custom publishing, great service, and sensible prices. They have a real loyal customer base. Also, as a small company, they have less overhead, fewer expenses. So like any small company, it's actually easier for them to remain more profitable because they don't have as big a debt load. My royalty statements, I know a lot of people just agonize over how terrible the royalty statements are. Mine tend to be really simple and easy to understand. So a typical royalty statement for me for all 4 of my books in my series would be about 22 pages in length. It has very little jargon. It's very clear and easy to read. Now, this is just a little thing, and but I think it's a smart move, and I know all the authors at Morton appreciate it. With each new edition, they give me a plaque and send it to me in the mail, and it's a plaque that showcases the cover of that new edition, and it just says on it, "In appreciation, Morton Publishing Company." Now, again, it might seem like a small thing, but all the authors love getting these, and I know I put them in the wall in my home office, and it's really nice. So I have this title, From Acquisitions Editor to CEO and President. So the photo of the person that you see here is David Ferguson. He's now the president and CEO of the company. And I've watched David over the last 17 years go from an editor all the way to president and CEO. So he actually signed me to my first book contract as an editor. And so I've seen him go through the company. So I guess it really makes you think about following the golden rule and treating people the way they deserve to be treated, because you never know that person that you meet where they'll be in the future. So it's kind of interesting just to point that out. These are all the sales reps at Morton. As you can see, a dozen people. I could tell you stories about each one of them, but for sake of time, I won't. But again, each one of these sales reps will learn does a multi-state territory. And I often work with them together on a regular basis to solicit feedback and to talk about, oh, how can we land this adoption? How can we do this? How can we do that? So the last key point I have in my presentation is marketing tips for working with small publishers, but these are also going to apply to large publishers as well. The first one is to reach out to the sales staff and contact them. Now, you just saw the sales staff. There was only a dozen people, right? I know them well. They know me. I really make an effort to communicate and to have a really open relationship, because I look at it as we're all part of a team. We all have a goal of trying to help these books to be successful. And so this has paid enormous dividends for me over the years. And I learned all this through TAA when I first joined. Show appreciation to the sales staff. How do I do that? Gift cards. Now, if you work for a really large company, that would be very difficult to do. You have an enormous sales staff, but I send out a $25 gift card for each of the sales reps around the holidays, around Christmas time. And I'm just always amazed at how much they appreciate this. It's usually a Barnes and Noble's gift card or an Amazon gift card. And they always write me and tell me, thanks so much, Paul. You're the only author at Morton who does this. That alone tells you, you know, how much they appreciate it. I also thank all the sales staff in the acknowledgement pages of my books, and then I inform them that they did it, because they won't always go there to look at that. I need to thank Ron Pinn for this, because many, many years ago when I first joined TAA, I learned that from him. And it was an excellent suggestion about marketing. Again, work with the sales staff and let them know that we're all in this as a team. I also would say strategize with your marketing manager. The vice president of Morton is also the marketing manager. And I'm going to have a Zoom meeting with him after this conference. And we're going to talk about some of the things I learned here and how we can implement some of the things I learned here. I just emailed him yesterday, and we're setting up a time to do that in July. Okay. Let's see. Okay, so for the next slide, I had a little advanced trouble myself here. Okay, so attend conferences where they are promoting your book and stay at the vendor table. So I'll typically do that. I'm sure many of you do things like that already. Sometimes it's in your contract. That's an important thing to do. Make a reference sheet for the sales reps with tips on how to sell your book. So I know what professors like about my books and what students like about my books. And just to give you one example of what sometimes you know that your sales rep or other people might not know, anatomy physiology is a grueling course, and a lot of times students don't pass it the first time and need to take it again. So we started to use a phrase that you're going to see me use later of pass your course the first time by using these books. And that phrase is kind of like a sales phrase. And I was able to incorporate that, put it on a reference sheet, and give it to the sales reps, and they appreciate that. Make suggestions for book cover design. So I just showed you a book cover that I helped design that I think is a better advertisement for my book than things they've used in the past. Create short, less than 2-minute YouTube videos about your book. So I have a YouTube channel, and I've used that to create promotional videos. And I'm going to show you that and highlight that as one of the last key things here. So tips for YouTube videos. This will be my last key point. You want to make them short, less than 2 minutes. The real key thing that I found is really important, and this is learning from tips from other people who did it, you need a hook. What they typically say is if you don't grab the viewer's attention in the first 10 to 15 seconds, they're clicking on something else, they've moved on, and you're not going to look at your whole video. Make it professional. Use online services. The one I use is a fee-based one, but it's very reasonable cost, and you can sign up for a month and cancel month by month. You don't have to go a whole year. It's called Animoto. Animoto gives you a lot of templates, and all the graphic design and everything's already done, and it looks really professional. Testimonials are really important. I used a lot of student testimonials in my videos. Try to showcase unique features in your book and provide a link at the end for online purchases. So here's what I did. What I did was, in anticipating that there could be technical problems by showing a video across Zoom, and I know sometimes there's glitches, what I did instead was I took screenshots from my YouTube video. Now, if you want to see this YouTube video, just go into YouTube and type in the words, A Visual Analogy Guide to Human Anatomy, the title of my book, A Visual Analogy Guide to Human Anatomy. Boom, it'll be the first thing that pops up. So if you want to see it later, just do that. Here's the screenshot. So I said you need a hook, right? And I just said that anatomy and physiology has a high failure rate. So here's a list of the top 4 highest failure rates for college courses. Number 1, college algebra. Number 2, organic chemistry. Number 3, physics. My course that I teach a lot of is in the top 4, anatomy, physiology. There's my hook. Given the high failure rates in anatomy and physiology courses, my book will help you succeed the first time through the course. So there's the hook. So here's a screenshot. Imagine the video's playing. We have background music. And the first slide that you see is this: problem, failing grades. Boom. Next thing that you see with a skull, anatomy and physiology, high failure rates in college. So we identify problem and we identify solution. What's a solution? That's when you first show the cover for your book, the name of your book, and author name. Then imagine the music playing, we're going along, and now we do a testimonial. And so I clustered all these testimonials together, but actually they're scattered around inside of my video. So it says, finally, a resource written by someone who knows how to teach. Testimonial 2. Anybody who is a visual learner needs this book. It helped me so much. Testimonial 3. By far the most useful resource for my anatomy and physiology class. Testimonial 4. This has been a lifesaver and absolute must-have for any anatomy student. I mined all these off of my Amazon reviews. It's often helpful to take a look at those. If you haven't taken a look at those and you're not looking Amazon Central, I'd recommend that you do that. Unique features. I have analogies, improves visualization skills. I have mnemonics, memory aids, and then unique features. I show the coloring activities this way. And then at the very end, I have a link for my purchase. It says, buy it new on Amazon. And below the video, there's a link for them to click on it. So the feedback that I got from my sales reps and from the marketing forces, they really appreciate these, and it's really helping with landing some new adoptions. So pandemic sales update. That's my last slide before I say thanks and close. All my publishers' titles suffer significant decreases in sales during the pandemic, but my editor told me, except for my book. So I had a pretty stable sales, I'm grateful to say, during the pandemic. So that was a kind of a sigh of relief for me. So I wanted to thank everyone for your attention today. And it looks like we still have maybe 8 minutes left for questions or so. So again, if you want to email me later, it's paulkriegerstudio@gmail.com. Thanks very much, everybody.
Well, thanks a lot, Paul. We do have a few questions here.
Sure.
But before we do that, I want to add a testimonial. I guess it's really kind of a disclosure in that I'm a customer. I've been a customer. I'm not right now, but I adopted Paul's Visual Analogy Guide for Anatomy and Physiology a number of years ago for a supplement course, because I too teach anatomy and physiology and my students struggle. And so I started a supplement course, and I didn't want to adopt a separate book for that. They already had to pay a big price for their textbook and lab manual. And I thought, oh, this is just another burden. So I offered it in the bookstore as an option. And at the end of the first semester of teaching that A&P supplement course, I do what I often do in my courses and had a debriefing on the last day and said, what worked for you? What didn't work for you? How did it go for you in this semester? And so on. What could have been better? And several of them said, we need to talk to you about that book, that visual analogy book. And we're very upset about that. And I thought, oh my gosh, even just offering it optionally was a problem. And they said, no, you should have required it. And I'm like, what? And they said, yes, because half of us missed almost a whole semester of using the book until we saw some of our fellow students using it and asked them about it. And they showed us and told us how much it helped them in the main A&P course. So we went out and got it, but all that time missed, And so the point I'm making here is that, if you have an idea for a standalone supplement and you're thinking, oh, how's it going to do though? Because it's competing against required books that the students are already purchasing, think about that story that they want that extra book because that's what's going to help them dive into that big complex textbook. At least that's what happened in my case, the case of my students. So one of the questions we have here is from Jenya, and she says, she loves the hands-on aspect of what you're doing, of your project. And I think most of her questions were already answered. She was wondering how it's doing. And you kind of said that at the end there, that even in the pandemic, it was doing pretty good. And then, just another part of her question is, what's your publisher thinking in terms of digital? And I know you address digital, but I'm curious as to, what the publisher is saying going forward.
Yeah, so my publisher has offered it in a digital format for many, many years now. So I was real interested to see, they have it on Chug and Google Play and several different things like that. So when it was first came out, I was really interested to see myself what was going to happen with ebooks. And I suspected, well, we're going to see a big uptick in ebooks every year. And it just didn't happen. And I think a lot of the reason why was because what we talked about before. I mean, nobody knows what the future holds, and that may change in the next 5 years or so, and we may see more ebooks. But for me, it really doesn't matter in terms of royalties because the pricing on the ebook and the regular is the same. So in terms of my royalty, it wouldn't change.
Okay, we have another question here. Do you offer any teacher resources with your books?
What was that?
Teacher resources? Are there any teacher resources offered?
Yeah, this is a common question that comes up, and we really don't. My publisher has decided to let the book be its own book and not have ancillary things with it. But what's the question we commonly get now? I wanted something to go in my LMS, right? I want something to go in my learning management system like Blackboard or something. Do you have a PowerPoint? We haven't done that. And I think my publisher might be worried that if we get all those PDF pages out there, somehow it might infringe on some copyright and maybe hurt some of the book sales. And I don't know if that's true or not, but that's their decision. So make a long story short, no, we haven't been doing anything with that.
Yeah, we have another question here is, do your books come with coloring pencils?
Oh, that's actually a good thought. No, they don't. No, they don't come with coloring pencils, but those are so inexpensive and they can get them, at for very low cost. So we just have them do it on their own.
Okay, and then another question here, and I think you really did answer it, but just to emphasize again, do you really draw all the illustrations?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm always amazed at that.
This will really blow you away. When I first landed my first contract, my publisher said, so you can do all the illustrations digitally, right? And I said, sure, but I actually didn't know how to do it. So I was just determined to teach myself on the fly. So I had to learn Adobe Illustrator like from scratch. And I didn't know anything. And all the illustrations for the first edition were done from a very cramped hand because I created them all with a laser mouse. You usually have a tablet, like a Wacom tablet. That's what graphic illustrators use. I didn't know anything about those at the time. So I created them that way. And now to really freak you out, I'm a lefty, but I created them with a right-handed mouse. I have some weird ambidextrous things going on, or pseudo. Anyway, so I really do all the illustrations myself, and it's extremely time consuming.
And yet you answered the question. Yeah, sure, I can do that. It turned out to be a good answer. Not necessarily correct, but
Yeah,
a
right.
good answer. Another question we have here is, does your publisher charge a subscription fee to your students?
No, they're not doing anything with subscription fees yet. My publisher is still, they're really just working with a lot of straight book sales, either in print or electronic. And because they don't do textbooks, they do lab manuals, and a lot of other supplemental guides, but no subscription fees. And I'm not sure if they're planning that in the future. If they are, I haven't heard about it.
Okay, we only have 1 minute left, but we do have, well, actually 2 questions, but we'll try to get at least one of them. And that is, Dion, she teaches graduate courses in school counseling and wants to know, how do you find small publishers that are interested in your genre? Like for A&P was yours, but how would someone find one in their genre?
Well, I should mention that my publisher, for example, deals with other fields such as English composition and mathematics and computer science. So you could approach them if you have a book idea. Really, I think you just have to do some searching on the internet. I don't know off the top of my head. You know, there's Kendall Hunt, there's some other small publishers, but they are out there. You just have to do a little homework and a little online research, I think.
Okay, well, we're at time. We don't really have time for any more questions. So Paul, thank you so much. It was a very interesting presentation. Covered a lot of different things. Cool.
Thanks a lot, Kevin. I appreciate it.